Picture a young guy in a rural community near the bush. He's scrolling his phone, looking at the same digital world as anyone else, but dealing with high local unemployment. The usual path out involves packing up and heading to a crowded city to chase a paycheck. Yet right next door to many of these struggling towns sits South Africa's 21 national parks and major reserves, places like Kruger, Addo Elephant Park, and Pilanesberg. To outsiders, these massive tracts of land often look like isolated playgrounds. You imagine tourists in vintage vans with binoculars, walled off from the surrounding villages to look at animals. But the scale of what happens inside those borders shatters that image. This chart shows last year's foot traffic and financial intake. Over 6 million people visited these parks, and they generated a revenue pool of over 4 billion rand. If we break that total down, 2.8 billion rand of that cash came directly from tourism activities alone. Curious. So the question is, does a multi-billion rand reserve of capital just sit trapped behind corporate and government gates? Or does it cross the boundary to fund the livelihoods of the people living right next door? The most immediate place that money goes is straight into infrastructure employment. Keeping millions of acres of wild land running requires an army of staff. That cash pays for armed rangers, field guides, drivers, cleaners, cooks, and the people operating the lodges and courier shops inside the gates. To distribute this capital, SANParks uses a specific institutional mechanism called the Expanded Public Works Program. This initiative bypasses generic hiring processes. It was intentionally built to absorb labor, successfully creating thousands of new paid positions on the ground. This chart illustrates the demographics of that workforce. Notice how the hiring pool heavily targets one demographic. Over 60% of these thousands of jobs are explicitly awarded to local youth, and those positions are geographically targeted. The program prioritizes hiring young people whose addresses fall directly outside the park boundary lines. The national park operates as a localized wealth redistribution system. It pulls tourist dollars across the boundary fence and turns them into direct paychecks for the neighboring generation. The financial impact extends well past direct hires. The park itself acts as an economic anchor, supporting a wide web of secondary businesses. Locals use their geographic advantage to start their own operations. A young guy from a nearby village can train to become a tracking expert and launch a career taking visitors out on independent game drives. Others build business-to-business services. Young women in the surrounding communities launch catering companies, securing contracts to supply fresh food to the massive tourist lodges. The Pilanesberg Game Reserve provides a perfect model of this, actively facilitating a reliable network of employment and supplier contracts throughout its surrounding area. Value flows into these towns through other avenues too, including community wildlife donations and dedicated skills workshops that teach locals how to make and sell sustainable crafts. Every person who buys a ticket sets off a chain reaction. One admission fee seeds a diverse ecosystem of local suppliers, independent guides, and creators. Zoom out from the microeconomy, and the identity of these 21 locations shifts. They are functioning as the economic engines of rural South Africa. This integrated model addresses two heavy challenges at once. It maintains the ecological health of the country's natural heritage while preventing the collapse of local economies. Because the capital flows locally, talented young people have the means to build profitable, meaningful lives exactly where they grew up, without being forced to migrate to urban centers. If you're a student looking at your options, studying tourism, business, or conservation puts you directly into a thriving, multi-billion rand pipeline of opportunity. In South Africa, protecting wild spaces and animals doesn't compete with human progress. It provides the very foundation for building the nation's future.